I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing all right.
There you are. Got you on camera now. Well, thank you for taking the time to talk to us.
Absolutely. Were you able to get that paperwork over that I sent?
You did. Thank you so much. You're talking about the appeal?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was very helpful. So the purpose of today is, get you on recording, because I know that there are plans for a lot of training to happen the next 6 months regarding the new bill that was passed, kinship bill that was passed to address these alternative living arrangements and the kind of arrangement that supposedly Hampton tried to work with you on unsuccessfully. So, we wanted to get your story as well as other stories to be able to lay down the issue of why this bill was needed and why this work is needed to do this kind of practice better in Virginia, and to make sure that, parents aren't left in the dust as agencies do their assessments and place their children with relatives or fictive kin, and that there's a way for reunification to happen and services provided so that, the family separation doesn't have to happen unnecessarily or unnecessarily long.
Yeah.
So, I thought it was really important to have real stories like yours be told so that the people who are being trained, which would include DSS workers throughout the state, lawyers, judges, other stakeholders like court-appointed special advocates, guardians ad litem for children, all the folks that work in this world understand what the problem was and what this bill is actually doing to fix. So that's the purpose of what we're doing. And, your story is one of so many that are so compelling and, caused us, this office, to really step up and get into high gear the efforts to try to fix this problem. So we really appreciate you reaching out to us, as well as the other families that reached out to us, because we heard from, the relatives. We heard from a lot of relative caregivers who had their own issues, so parents like you had your side of the problem, to express, and a lot of the concerns expressed. But we also heard from the caregivers too, and the problems that they saw with the whole process. So, trying to get the stories from everybody to help with this training. So we're going to try this with you first.
All right.
Haven't done it yet, so we're hoping to be able to record this, as long as you're consenting to that. And
absolutely.
Your use. I'm going to try to. I don't think we need people's names, but that's going to be a discussion with the other folks that are doing these trainings. But I'm going to, we're going to edit it down and be able to make sure that it's, covers all the ground that we need to cover for the trainings. But for today's purposes, I just want you to tell your story. Like I said, you got a compelling story, and it was one of the first ones we got that addressed this issue. And, so we want to honor you in that, and really be, again, it's the gratefulness that we have for you to reach out to us in the beginning. So with that said, I'm going to try to get this thing set up to record.
Okay.
I'm going to turn my camera off because I don't want my face in this thing. But I'm still here.
Okay.
And I'm going to let you be a free form, tell your story, but I may interject with some questions just to, again, we want to make sure we cover all the issues.
Are we starting from the very beginning when CPS involvement occurred, or at the point that they, when we tried to dissolve the respite and they placed them in the so-called alternative living arrangement?
From the very beginning. I think it's important to get the whole context. Again, we may edit some things down just to protect you and your kids, but, I want the whole story just to cover, from from the beginning to make sure that people understand, where these cases come from and why CPS was first involved.
Okay.
That precipitated everything. So if that's okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure, because it's. I don't know. Like sometimes I feel like my version of it, and I guess the way that I look at it and other people have looked at it is because I'm the one that's involved in the situation and it's my children, I kind of care about more details of things that happen than others would. So that's why I was kind of asking.
No, the more details is great. Like I said, I'll cut it down if necessary. So, but, I want to make sure that the important parts of your story are told. So,
okay.
Let you make the call as to what you think you want to talk about. And then, like I said, for purposes of the training, I want to make sure we get as much of it that we can of the important stuff. So,
okay.
Let you tell your story. So, you ready?
Yes, sir.
All right. I pushed this button. Let's see. Start recording. Hey, I think it's going. I don't need a transcript. How do I stop this transcript?
I'm not sure.
Oh, well, we may have to do a transcript too. All right. So, Brittany Whitworth, tell us a story from the time the CPS first knocked on your door or you first got contacted by them.
So, actually, I guess technically my story would start about a week before CPS knocked on our door. And maybe even earlier than that. So, after the birth of my daughter, I started going through some issues. We didn't right off realize that I was going through some hormonal issues, but as time started progressing, we started realizing that it was a reoccurring thing. At least once a month, I would get really upset. The smallest things would upset me, usually between my daughter's father and me. It normally just came out on him. And I had tried getting into different therapies. I'd found different therapists and stuff like that. I guess that's a whole other issue because during that time, I was getting all of these wild diagnoses that didn't fit what was going on because I was only struggling maybe a week and a half, a month. So around December of 2021, an argument started. I guess apparently I was closer to that time period of when I was having issues. An argument started over something stupid. And in my episode, I started blowing it out of proportion. At that time, the police got called, which actually ended up later helping to save and prove our case, as crazy as that sounds. The police got called, investigated all the claims that I was making, found that, I was upset, over-exaggerating, as they stated in the report. There was claims of domestic violence, drug use. Cops searched, did thorough searches, found no drugs, found no paraphernalia, noted that there was no probable cause for any type of domestic violence, and went on their way. I believe that was around December 2nd or December 3rd of 2021. On December 7th of 2021, I was contacted by a CPS worker. They called my phone. I was out with my children. She asked me if I could meet her. We showed up at the house. She told me that she had allegations of drug use, that I had been run over with a truck and I was covered head to toe in bruises. Originally in this meeting, it was stated that my son had a black eye, which, it was clearly visible. We were all standing there, no marks on us. We had pictures of everybody over the last couple of days. It wasn't like any bruises or anything had gone away or anything like that, and I certainly hadn't been run over by a truck and wasn't covered head to toe in bruises. So at that point, a safety plan was signed, and I thought that she was going to be contacting me and my daughter's father, and it would be like a quick process getting things sorted out. Some days go by. I guess I forgot to add that there was, in everything that was going on, I went and took out an invalid protective order, even after the cops said that I didn't have any evidence to do so. The protective order was up on December 17th, 2021. Well, technically midnight. I would have to have gone to court to extend it. On December 16th, 2021, I ended up bringing my children over to my daughter's father's house. And they were decorating a Christmas tree. And we're working on different things like that were getting set up over at the house. I had been sick. My son had started out with an upset stomach that had passed over to my daughter, and then it had passed over to me. And that night at about 8 or 8:30 p.m., a second CPS worker showed up. At this time, she showed up with 2 Hampton police officers. Again, thankfully, the body cameras of the police officers. I'll get to that later, but she shows up. Now, there is a second report. The second report is almost identical to the first report, except now it's changed that instead of my son having a black eye, my daughter's father has a black eye. They also added in that he had a gun and was going to kill my son for hurting my daughter. When the second CPS worker showed up that night, she told us, and it was on the body-worn cameras, that, she had spent a significant amount of time going over the previous call and what had happened because everything was so similar. But because they had mentioned a gun and harm to a child, they felt like, it was better to check out what was going on than to not check out the allegation. She said that everything was fine. Should probably go away. They told us, different things that we could do to protect ourselves from the calls that were coming in. We ended up signing a safety plan with her that evening. The safety plan, I think, said nothing more than that nobody would cause harm to the children, and any firearms that were owned would be locked up and separated from ammo according to Virginia law, which was no big issue at all. At the time, I was a concealed carry permit holder. So they leave. I guess that was probably about 9 o'clock. She was only there about 20 or 30 minutes. Everybody goes to bed for the night. About 9 o'clock the next morning, I get a telephone call from the first original worker. Now, the other property that I rented for about 5 years, so my daughter's father had one property, and I had a property that was in my name. The property that was in my name, we were actually renting out a room to another family originally. Some issues had happened. The mother was not supposed to be at the house. A phone call happened. I'm not sure. All I know is that my daughter's father went over there to figure out what was going on at the house. The police got called, and basically they just escorted them off the property because she wasn't supposed to be there. At that point in time, I got a call from the social worker asking me to meet her at that property with the children. As I showed up, I guess I later learned from the body-worn cameras that she had informed my daughter's father already that she was there to remove our children based on a broken safety plan and a broken protective order. He was very confused because nobody had even spoken to him. He had no idea about any safety plan. He had no idea about anything that was going on. And when he asked her, what do I got to do to get the children back? I guess the response from the body-worn cameras that I saw was that it was going to start with domestic violence classes and substance abuse classes. So about that time is when I get there with the children. And I'm informed of the situation. And we're basically told that we have a short amount of time to figure out somebody who can take our children, or we can sign a paper and put them in what is called respite for up to 21 days. We were told that respite, we would keep legal custody of the children. We just would not have physical custody of the children, that it could be dissolved at any time while things were figured out. And we were told that if we did not sign the children into respite, that the children would be removed right then. We called around trying to find friends or family that could take the children. However, at the drop of a dime, most people aren't prepared to take in 2 kids. My aunt did show up during the removal of the children. And basically, it felt like coercive control. I mean, we were basically intimidated into, you either sign this paper and you put your children in this respite, or they're going to take the kids. And the way it made it seem is like, you don't really want to put that stress or that show on your children and say no and go through all of that and try to figure out, and you don't really know what your rights are to say yes or no, and you've got 4 cops standing there. And so at that point, we made the decision that, we were going to sign the respite papers and not put the children through a scene and everything. And we signed the papers. This was about a 2-hour ordeal. Now, I'm sorry, I know you're going to have to edit this, but is it okay to mention about how the removal actually went with the way people acted during that removal?
Yeah, I'd like to hear that.
Because
and try not to mention the jurisdiction.
Because one of the most horrible things I think about the removal of the children, I mean, there's probably nothing more horrible than your children being removed. But for in the process of the children being removed, to have people standing around, laughing, joking, carrying on. I've had bad teeth most of my life. I had really bad teeth at the time of the removal of my children. The officers stood around, assumed that I was a drug addict. I am not a drug addict. I am not a recovering addict. I've never been on any type of hard drugs. I was called a heroin addict. I was called the poster child for a heroin addict. They joked that I was a crackhead. Later found on the body cameras where they said that I would likely overdose after they took my children from me. You can see different parts where my daughter's father is literally holding me as I'm crying while we're trying to figure out how to stop this from happening. And this woman is literally laughing and carrying on about her upcoming vacation a week before Christmas. I mean, it was almost mind-boggling. It was mind-boggling to listen to somebody flat out say on a body-worn camera how obviously well-loved my children were as they were being taken from me. Especially when you think of the system and you think of abuse or neglect, you're not thinking of children that are well-loved. That's not abuse and neglect. Some of that I didn't find out until later. We knew about her laughing and joking and carrying on. I didn't find out about, I guess there was a story that the officer told about a parent pushing down a social worker and being charged with parental abduction and having to go a year to get her children back. And the social worker literally says that if anybody had ever laid a hand on her, it would be a death sentence to their parental rights. And I mean, I kind of like, when you're unpacking things emotionally as a parent and you're looking at it, it's like, how does somebody with a mindset like that get this much power and control over families? Like, I understand that to a degree you have to be able to set certain emotions aside in order to do that job and in order to get things done, but at what point, is there supposed to be no compassion or empathy in what you're doing? So the children were removed on December 17th in the morning. We're originally told that, my aunt that's there, that the children will get to go stay the night at her house for Christmas so that we don't miss Christmas with our children, and that they're going to get the family engagement meeting set up as soon as possible. And it ended up being set up for that Monday, December 20th. And we go in, and at that point, we started recording everything. And I told the truth. I let them know that I was in therapy, that I had been experiencing issues, that what had happened was something that had gotten blown out of proportion by me. I was basically accused of covering for my abuser. Even though I had appointments and things to prove, there were we were telling them, hey, there's police body camera footage. There's a police report that proves that I was over exaggerating and having an issue, and no one would listen. It was literally just that I was covering up for my daughter's father so that he could abuse me and my children more. Okay? So, they say that they want us to go down and take a urine screen and a hair sample. So, we're scheduled to go take it the very next day. That's December 21st. On December 21st, we go and we take the test. And I am actively calling, trying to find out when we're going to get to talk to the kids, where the kids are, when we're going to get to see them. And at that point, I am pretty much notified that until the results of the drug screen come back, we are not allowed to have any communication with children. Okay, so I know drug screening, at least the urinalysis, takes a couple of days. At that point, I believe it was December 23rd, I get a video call. My son had his own cell phone that we paid for. He had an iPhone, and he had the Facebook Kids Messenger. So me and him could FaceTime, and we could messenger video call. And he video calls me on December 23rd. And we're talking to him, and his sister sees that it's us. And she grabs the phone, and at this point in time, my children are in a foster home. I later learned what happened from this, but so my son and my daughter grabs the phone and runs off. The foster parents see us on the phone and see that we see them, and the phone just gets hung up. Okay? So I later learned that because of that incident, my son's phone was then confiscated from him. And he was then moved to a third home. I didn't even know about the original first home. Apparently, I later learned that because of my son's speech issues, the original family that had him were struggling too hard to understand him. So, in this 21-day respite period, my children are already on home 3 by day 5. So we start, inquiring about Christmas, and my aunt's trying to get a hold of them, and my aunt was, perfectly fine with them coming to stay the night, but she did not have the room for them to live there. Now, when I speak to my aunt tells me that it was portrayed to her that if my children left respite for the night and came and stayed with her for the night for Christmas, that my children would have to stay there permanently throughout this ordeal, and they didn't know how long it would last. So now all of a sudden, we're missing Christmas with our children. We don't get to speak to them. We don't get to see them. So as soon as Christmas is over, I know the doctor's offices are opening back up. And because I want to see and talk to my children, I start calling the doctor's office, trying to find out if the drug screening has come back in. Because if that's what it's hanging on, well, I know that I'm going to pass this drug screen. I need this to come back in. I finally call, and I call in the morning, and I kept all of the records of this. And they tell me, yes, that the drug screens came back in. But that the doctor is in a conference meeting. The results are in there with him. If I wanted the results, I needed to contact the social worker. I wanted my drug results straight from the office that did it, not from the social worker. I already felt that there was an extreme bias because I would not play the victim that I wasn't. So I was concerned about getting anything told to me third party through the department. So I waited a few hours, and I called the doctor's office back. And I was told the same thing, that the doctor was in a meeting, he was the one that had the results, that if I wanted the results, I could call the social worker. So I knew the doctor's office, they stayed open kind of late. They were open until 6 p.m. And so at about 5:30, I tried one last time. And at that time, they answered the phone and told me that they were notified that the only way that I could get a copy of those drug screening results was to get them from the social worker. And I'm sorry, but that is illegal to withhold somebody's medical records from them. So at that point, I felt like something was seriously wrong. Like, if this is what's stopping me from seeing my children and you're preventing me from getting an actual copy of it, I thought something was wrong. So, of course, I did what everybody does, and I got on Google, and I started trying to look up information about, what do you do, this, that, and the other. One of the things that I found online was, hey, make sure you get a lawyer. Don't take just any court-appointed attorney. Try to get your own attorney. And one of the tips that I read was to try to get an attorney that wasn't necessarily in your city, so that there was less chances that they were worried about their look in front of the department. So I started calling around everywhere. I mean, everywhere. I am calling attorneys left and right. And the moment that I say that there is CPS involvement, I am just getting, no, we don't handle that. No, we don't handle that. No, we don't handle that. Well, I finally find an attorney that answers and say, yeah, we handle that. And the paralegal that answers the phone, I mean, she is thorough. She is great. She sounds good. And we're like, yeah, okay, this sounds great. We let her know what's going on. We pay the retainer fee. We retain the attorney. The first thing she does is she sends a letter over to the doctor's office and demands the release of the drug screens. Within 5 minutes of the receipt of that letter over to the doctor's office, I had the results in my email. The next thing she did was move to dissolve the respite, because the respite can be dissolved at any time. So once I knew that had been sent to the department, I called the department wanting to know where I needed to pick my children up from. If my children were no longer in respite, they needed to return home. At that point, I was informed that I was only being told as a courtesy, because I had an attorney already, that they were moving for an ex parte emergency removal order, and that the children were being detained until the hearing that was going to occur the next day. I didn't know anything about how the court system worked back then, so I really had no idea what that meant. I learned the next morning that it meant that the department would go in front of the judge and submit an order basing why they felt my children were being abused and neglected, and I was not allowed in the room. I was not allowed to defend myself. My attorney they allowed in the room, however, she was not allowed to speak. She was just allowed to witness the hearing, and I was told it was done as a courtesy because I already had an attorney. So that court date was January 7th. On January 11th, we had the first actual initial court date where I was there. And at that point in time, now, the department knew from the beginning that my son's grandmother was not a placement option to me. There was a lot of turmoil there. There had been previous history 10 years prior. Well, at this time, it's now 10 years prior. At that time, it was 8 years prior. She had tried the same ordeal of calling CPS on me, trying to take my son, her grandson. Back then, the social worker that came out, I mean, she realized that literally the only thing back then I was struggling with was housing. I was struggling to afford rent on a minimum wage job. And the woman basically helped me get situated. We ended up moving to Maryland. I lived in Maryland for about 5 or 6 years. She had also sent CPS after me in Maryland. Both cases were unfounded and closed out. So the department knew well from the beginning that I did not want my children placed there. We had a lot of toxic issues. I didn't trust my children around her. There was my children had already, we had already banned her from being in our lives months and months prior, which I believe was the reason for the cause, was retaliation. So I come to learn on January 11th that my children have been placed with her. At that point in time, we had the attorney. I was really kind of trusting the attorney to, get the body cams, get, the police reports and the different evidence that we were telling her existed because when I tried to FOIA request the evidence that we needed to prove that I was telling the truth and that all of this had been investigated, we were originally told that because there were minors, it wasn't allowed to be released. That it had to be either subpoenaed by an attorney or a judge had to subpoena those and release it because of it having a minor. So at that point, I'm still kind of relying on this attorney who, at this point, she's not really doing anything. She's not submitting any evidence that's been given, anything along those lines. And, since I was feeling really weird, I'd already started recording everything. There wasn't a meeting that we had with them, a phone call that we had with them, anything that wasn't either recorded or written in email. During the January 11th court, it is set up that I will get to visit with my children. It'll be a supervised visit at a public place for January 13th. So I showed up, recording, of course, the visit in my pocket. And, my son carries on telling me all of these things, all of these adult conversations that he's being told. How my daughter's father is going to go to jail and never going to see him again. How I've been lying to him all of his life. I mean, things that I have hard proof that I never lied to him about. And the visit ends, and I ask the social worker if I can speak to her. And I bring up to her that I don't think it's appropriate that my son is telling me all of these things, all of these adult conversations that he shouldn't be being told. He's 8 years old. He shouldn't be being drugged into this. And she agrees, and she makes a comment about how she loves how much my daughter clings to me. And I told her, prior to this, I had never spent even a day away from my children. And she was like, yeah, I understand. And I started crying, and I was just like, no, you really don't. Have a good day. And I walked out. We then had court again. I want to say it was around January 22nd or January 24th. And at this court date, the social worker and the grandmother who have my children got on the stand in court and lied and said that at this visit that I screamed at the social worker and stormed out of the visit and all of this other stuff that occurred. And by this point, I had already gotten frustrated. We had a guardian ad litem. The guardian ad litem had never contacted me, had never been to my house, had never had a real conversation with me. As I'm coming out of court that day, or the right after or before it, I had gotten a call from her, and she had asked me if I was doing okay, and I was like, no, I'm not. And I was explaining to her, how we were being blocked from the children, the situation that was going on, that nobody was showing anybody any of the evidence. And I was told to email everything over to her, and that we would be setting up a home study for her to come look at my home, because we had court coming up on Monday. So I sent her everything. I sent massive amounts of emails with just all of the evidence that I had, just revolving around the kids, the recording of the visit. I had also sent the recording of the visit to my attorney. So when we go to court and the social worker and the grandmother lies, I am telling my attorney, you have a copy of this recording, this didn't happen. And everybody is in court acting like this recording didn't exist. My attorney literally was like, what recording? As if she didn't even check what I had uploaded to her. And the guardian ad litem sat by and said nothing, which was really kind of strange to me because most guardian ad litems are attorneys. How can you sit there and watch somebody commit perjury in court and say nothing? You've got the evidence sitting right in your email, and I have proof that I sent it to you. So, at this court date, everything remains the same, that the woman who has my children keeps my children. Visitation is left at her discretion, which means that I get none. And we're set to come back to court on February 28th. On February 28th, we pretty much go through the exact same scenario. The attorneys don't present any evidence. My case had no evidence from my side, and the only evidence that was ever submitted from the city's side was the original emergency removal order. So at that point, custody is upheld, the case closes. In between all of that, so from the January court date, from February, I tried to reach out to the department, trying to find out, what we were doing to get my children home. We had already told them well early on, like, if the only thing you need is this or that for us to prove to you this is what the situation is for our children to come home, we're willing to do that. Hey, can we please get an unbiased caseworker that's willing to work with our family? Of course, we were denied that. But at that point, that's when we were told that our case was not a foster care case. That custody, legal and physical custody, had been transferred to my son's grandmother the day before the ex parte hearing. So I've always been a little bit confused about how legal custody was transferred without a judge ordering a legal custody transfer. And that because it was a legal custody transfer and not a foster care case, my family didn't have to be offered services. We didn't have to be offered a reunification plan. We didn't have any specified goals to come up with, and visitation would be held between me and the respective family member, which everybody already knew was strained. So at that point, I was getting video visits with my children on Tuesdays and Thursdays, dealing with a lot of interference from the woman who has my children during these visits. And we had appeals court in August. So at that point in time, I couldn't afford to, and secondly, I didn't even want to try to afford to hire another attorney after the mess it felt like we hired somebody to do nothing. And when you're sitting there as a person that doesn't understand how court goes, you think, well, you can't speak out for yourself. Your attorney's supposed to do that. You don't just blurt it out in court. You don't just say this. You don't just say that. So you kind of sit by relying on them. So at that point, I was told that because it was a child welfare case, I was supposed to be able to get an attorney appointed. And so I started calling the circuit court, who kept denying me, saying that at that level they didn't appoint attorneys, that if I didn't have an attorney, I didn't have an attorney. It wasn't until I was later provided the code stating that they had to give me an attorney that I called back, and that was finally done. I had to submit a motion to the court asking for it. However, the attorney was appointed 1 month before my case. We had one meeting, of course, I recorded it. I was recording everything at that point. At that point, we had contacted the Ombudsman's office early on in the case. We had finally gotten our report back from the Ombudsman's office, and we thought, great, this is at least going to show the department didn't meet what they were supposed to meet before removing our children. Like, they have to see that something wasn't right here and start looking into things. And at that point in time, the attorney informed me wrongfully that the Ombudsman's report was not admissible in court, and that the department had received a copy of it, but that they refused to change their stance. I believe where I became more alarmed in this is because during the first JDR courts, I could tell that nobody in that room had a copy of the original police reports. I could tell that nobody in that room had looked at any of the body cams or had actually paid attention to any of the evidence that was sent. However, in the original emergency removal order, it cited the opposite of a police report. It said in the emergency removal order that the police report cited drugs and domestic violence. However, the police report said no drugs, no paraphernalia, no signs of domestic violence. I got even more concerned probably during circuit court when I realized that the city attorney was actually reading off of the police report and still using the case as if there was domestic violence and drugs. And when I say drugs, I don't just mean drug use. The allegation was that there was heroin bags and heroin needles laying all around in a manner that my children could get into. Again, I have another attorney. I yet again end up with a court trial that happens and no evidence is submitted. Nothing. No evidence was ever submitted on my case. So then I lose in circuit court. The lawyer notes the appeal and she withdraws because she doesn't handle the higher court appeals. This is in August of 2022. So I'm told that a new attorney is going to be appointed to me. They'll reach out to me as things are getting ready for the State Court of Appeals. At that point in time, I got frustrated and I reached out to the governor's office. And I don't know why. I guess everybody assumes that, hey, that's who runs the state of Virginia. That's who you reach out to. At that point in time, a program director from Richmond called me. And this was probably October of 2022. And she was looking through my case and, she noticed I was very thorough about filing things and making sure that things were turned in and different things. And she noticed that we had been founded for level 2 physical neglect, inadequate supervision by the Department of Social Services. And we are supposed to have the right to appeal that. And I didn't know that. I didn't get a letter saying that I could appeal it. She explained to me that, they urge local departments to use certified mail so they know that you receive it, but a lot of them don't. So I get told that I need to reach out and find out, if because this paper wasn't mailed, what's going to happen. The paper finally gets mailed out. We put in for an appeal on the CPS side. The local department, I believe, had 30 or 45 days to respond whether they would give us our appeal, and they missed the deadline. So we moved to have that appeal moved up to the state level. While we were waiting on all of that, I also started trying to figure out what was going on with the other side of court. I'm waiting, and I had been told that it could take, anywhere from 6 to 8 months for, court dates, sometimes up to 2 years at the state level of appeals. So, not really first off hearing from anybody and still not fully knowing how all the courts work, wasn't too concerned about it. And then we finally get an appeal date for May 25th at the state level with the administrative side of CPS. Around March or April, I started reaching out to the city to try to FOIA request the body cameras and the police reports again. At this point, I figure I have to represent myself in this administrative hearing. It is something that it could eventually go to court. I'm going to try to see, can I request this as a pro se litigant, or do I need to have a way to subpoena it? I reach out. I'm informed that a law changed and that I should just regularly FOIA request. I do that. I put it in. It takes a couple of weeks to get the evidence. We finally get that in. During that time, I receive an email. All of a sudden, I get an email from this attorney that has been appointed to me. And apparently what happened is the court never notified him that he was my attorney. He almost missed the deadline for the appeal at state level. He went to try to go get transcripts or any type of recording of the circuit hearing. And of course, I'm recording everything this time. And there was no transcripts. There was no anything. So they also told him, the department, my previous attorney, and everybody in the room apparently had no way to get in contact with me. Not my phone number, not my email, not anything. Even though it was on every single court paper. So he actually submits I think it was about a 38-page briefing to the Virginia state courts. And if you read the briefing, the entire briefing has, how do we have a case sitting at the state level that has no evidence on it? Now, I'll admit he did a good job considering he wrote that entire briefing without ever even speaking to me. The main issue that I have is because the courts dropped the ball on properly notifying him he was my attorney. This 6 to 8 month wait for a trial date is now pushed out 6 months more. So as this is going on, we finally have our appeal with the Department of Social Services. We represent ourselves pro se. We finally are able to submit all of our evidence ourselves. And we have the hearing. I believe we had to wait 60 days to get the results. But we did end up winning the appeal. We were unfounded. We were removed from the abuse and neglect registry. And in my head, I'm thinking, okay, great. This means we proved we didn't abuse and neglect our children. We proved this is not what was happening. We proved this was not what was going on. So that means our children come home, right? Well, no, because the jurisdiction of CPS and the administrative hearing has no bearing on what a judge decided, even though it was the same information that was used. So at that point, you know, I want my children home. My children at this point have been gone 2.5 years. At that point, we were coming up on 1.5 years, almost the 2-year mark. And so I'm thinking, okay, well, there has to be a way to do this. So I tried to go and file with the courts all of the fraud that happened in my case, the perjury, the things that we now have the actual evidence to prove that nobody would help us get, not even our own attorneys. And I'm told that there's a statute of limitations on intrinsic fraud, and the difference between intrinsic fraud and extrinsic fraud, and that there is jurisdictional issues that doesn't allow that part of the case to be reopened. And, you know, it just kind of feels like you can find everything wrong with it, but nothing fixes from it. And that's kind of where I'm at now. The fraud side of my case was dismissed. I was also told that in order to have any of that heard in the lower level courts, I couldn't have my state appeal, which I ended up withdrawing because, like, I felt like I'm pushing more and more and more time away from my children. Like, what do? Do you sit around and wait for years and hope, or do you go back to court and keep trying to find a different way? So, as it stands right now, I've discontinued the appeal, and I have a pending custody court matter in about 5 months. Trying to find, because there's been no help, no pathway, no anything on how to bring my children back home.
Are you represented by an attorney now?
No, I'm still pro se.
Do you have a court date for your custody case yet?
Yeah, November 14th.
Have you been to court yet for, like, a docket call on that?
So because there was a bit of mishaps over the appeal, so I'm still very confused. When I filed in the court, I filed 2 motions. I filed a motion to vacate orders based on the fraud, and I also said a motion to amend custody based on the fact that the custody movement was granted on fraudulent information. When the judge split my case, it was said to me that he was going to split the case so that as my fraud case was dismissed, I could appeal it and fight that in the other court and still have a chance for getting custody of the children in the lower courts. When the fraud was heard de novo in circuit court, the circuit court refused to hear my fraud case, dismissed it again, and when I tried to appeal it, I was told that as long as I appealed that fraud into the upper courts, that the lower courts wouldn't hear it, because basically if I won in the upper courts, there was no order for him to rule on anymore. The problem with that is that sets us right back into that time loop of 6 to 8 months, if you're lucky, maybe 1.5 years. So at this time, the last hearing that we had, the judge said that on November 14th, when we come in, it was set for trial. Everybody better be ready for the custody trial. So,
did they explain to you what the legal standards are for you to get that custody arrangement amended?
So, from what I have been told, it is a change in circumstances.
Material change in circumstances.
Yeah. Which, I'm not going to lie, I'm a little bit confused on, because if I have enough proof that the material change in circumstances, like, what exactly was supposed to change on my end. And I'm also a little bit even more confused because we're talking a third party having custody over a natural parent.
Exactly.
So,
which, when custody was granted to the grandmother, that eliminated your parental preference.
yes. Yes, it did. And, parental rights wise, I am supposed to still be entitled to, like, medical with my children and educational and different things like that. I have been blocked from my son's entire education. I found out that my son was in ICU through court testimony. I have no idea anything about their doctors, what happens, what goes on, anything about their education, nothing.
Have you been able to visit with them?
So when I refiled for the custody stuff, the judge did appoint me a new guardian ad litem in this part of the case, and the guardian ad litem offered to supervise visits. So we did one visit back in January with the guardian ad litem at the same public place that we went to before, and the visit ended, and I waited a few days, like a week or so, because we had court again coming up and we're checking in on things. And when I found out court was getting set out so far, I reached back out to the guardian ad litem and I was like, hey, I know that it was a courtesy that you extended. I was just wondering, if that courtesy was still available, if you were still willing to chaperone, supervise the visits. And she wrote me back and told me that she thought that my visit went great, that she wouldn't even recommend to the court that I needed supervision, but that the grandmother did not feel like the children visiting with me, with her supervising, was in the children's best interest, so she wasn't allowing it anymore.
How many times have you seen your kids since they were first removed?
Physically, twice.
And how often virtually?
A handful of times between March and June of 2022.
Going back to the beginning of the case, there was a lot that decided upon that drug screen. So did the drug screen come back positive or negative?
So my drug screen, both hair and urine, was only positive for legal THC.
What do you mean by legal THC?
Marijuana is legal in Virginia. The only thing that was in my system was marijuana. And I was honest about that from the start.
Anything else I should ask here? Oh, yeah. During the whole process that DSS was involved, what was the communication and engagement between you and the workers?
Slim to none. I remember at one point they told us to try to get a list of people together that could possibly take the children, and some of my friends had tried. They were denied for some of the strangest reasons. Like, they were honest and said that they had quit smoking marijuana like a few months prior, but said that since it can stay in your system up to 90 days, there was a slight possibility they would fail for it. They were told that they wouldn't even be an option because of the possibility of it. I remember at one point being contacted and being told that they had contacted the courts in the state I originally lived in and couldn't find a single trace of me having legal custody of my child. However, I literally could timestamp. It took me less than a minute to go right to the court's website and pull up the entire custody order right on the website. So throughout that, let's see, we had the family engagement on December 20th. We spoke to the department once or twice in regards to trying to get the children to my aunt's house, and when we would be able to see them and visit them while the whole drug screen ordeal was going on. The social workers supervised the original visit but didn't speak to me that visit, other than the end of it that she ended up lying about. And outside of that, they never spoke to us.
The supervisor lied about the visit?
The social worker, yeah, she testified on the stand that at the end of my visit that I screamed at her and stormed off. She didn't realize that I was recording the visit in my pocket.
What about your aunt? What happened with that?
So my aunt didn't have room to take the children. She had tried, like I said, she had tried to get them for Christmas, but she told me that the department made it sound to her that if she took them for one night, she had to keep them for the duration of the case. And I was informed by my couple of friends that had reached out trying to find out about the children that they were being scared into to being told that, we want you to know that this might not be a quick thing. It could end up being a year or two. Are you prepared for that?
Wow. Did you get to see your kids on Christmas?
No. Mm-mm. We didn't even get to speak to them. I still have all of their Christmas gifts put away. They've never gotten them. My aunt had gifts for them. There's not a single person in my family that has seen our children. I also have an older daughter. She's 19 now. She was instantly blocked from my children. As soon as custody was assumed, every social media contact way that anybody in my family had was blocked.
You tried to explain to DSS that the relationship between you and this relative was strained already, right?
Yeah, and that I had extreme concerns. So one of the issues that we had, well, there were multiple issues, first and foremost, but the person that has my children is actually on disability, stating that they're unable to care for children. Sometimes, however, previously, like a while previously, she would babysit for us. However, we had some issues with her being very toxic to my children. Some issues with her being, completely incapacitated while in the presence of my children. And that was what kind of had started the issue. My son and my daughter have different fathers. However, in my household, we never looked or treated the children. It wasn't, that's your half-sister, that's your half-brother. It wasn't, oh, y'all aren't fully. It was, that's your brother, that's your sister. Your brother and sister, you're treated the same way. Like, there's no difference in that. We were having some serious issues with her trying to drive a wedge between my son and my daughter in those manners. And we had decided that it was best that she not babysit or be around the children anymore. That had occurred probably in July or August of 2021. And the next thing you know, the situation in December happens and she picks up the phone and calls CPS.
And she's not blood relation to your daughter.
Nope, not at all. And what worried me and concerned me even more is that I had evidence of conversations with this woman where she's going on and on about wanting to adopt a little girl, but her husband doesn't want to. And I gave that to them too. You can literally hear on one of the recordings, because at one point in time, my daughter's father was looking at it as, she's not the best option. I don't trust her around the children. But at least if the children are with her, we know where they are. And you can even hear me tell him, if they place the children with her, we will never see them again. That was my exact words.
You told that to DSS?
Yeah. Nobody wanted to listen, and it seemed more like they were sided with whoever would roll with whatever they wanted to say. Amy was, I'm sorry for that. I know you're going to have to edit that out, but the grandmother was willing to say and do anything that they wanted. And there's an old saying that I've heard lawyers say, and it's always, the hardest person to defend is an innocent person because they care more about clearing their name than they do about the outcome. And in the emotional aspect of the children being taken, that's kind of mentally and emotionally where I was like, I can't not tell the truth of what was going on here. Like, what am I supposed to do, you know? So I was just so set that if we cleared our name and we proved that all of this wasn't true, then our children should be home. And I thought for sure that all it was going to take was for somebody to see the police reports and the body cams that proved that, hey, I'm admitting that I was having a hormonal issue. I'm admitting that this is what was going on. I was later diagnosed with PMDD. I have been on birth control for over a year and a half because it's something that helps control those episodes. It's done wonders, but we also have issues in our health system where things get misdiagnosed. I was misdiagnosed for mental health issues repeatedly before anybody would even look at the fact that it was actually a hormonal issue and not a mental health issue. Yeah, I got probably about 15 diagnoses in about 7 months. Had one doctor almost overdose me on medication. So, and, you know, you're left feeling like, you know, this agency, like, isn't their entire job supposed to be to help stabilize those exact situations? Like, and to help it to where it works for the family instead of the opposite? Like, that's kind of always been the mind-blowing part to me, is like, I could understand if the children were truthfully being abused and neglected and all of this other stuff, but it was a situation that a few conversations and a little bit of help in the right direction, and it was solved.
When your kids were placed in respite care and after when they were placed with a relative, did the agency communicate with you as to anything that they wanted you to do to get the kids back? Did they say that they were going to, that was the goal, was to make it safe for the children to return home to you?
No, so originally in that family engagement meeting, the only thing that was discussed was like counseling and maybe family therapy, and I think they wanted my daughter's father to try to look into counseling. But I had already provided them with, I already was with a therapist. Like, I was already seeing a therapist. I was already, like, at that point, I would think I was on maybe my third medication try. They had moved me from a couple of different meds that just weren't working. So I had already submitted to the department that I had a therapist and I had appointments coming up. And the other thing was pendant, I believe, on the drug screens. But once we got that attorney and they dissolved, like, and she tried to dissolve the respite, I mean, there was literally nothing. And honestly, for the truth of the matter, I didn't even know that my attorney had reached out to the department asking the same questions that I was asking about, like, reunification and goals and things like that, until I got my copy of the Ombudsman's report and saw it in there. So.
And you were told it wasn't a foster care case and no services were required, right?
Correct. And that was me blatantly asking, like, what do we need to do here? What are we setting up so that I can work to have my children home? Like, what is our goals? What is visitation going to be? Like, how is this going to work? And I mean, I basically felt like I was just told, hey, we moved your kids. We don't have to help you.
Well, Brittany, that was perfect.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Sorry, I messed up with that name.
No, don't worry. That's easily editable. But I'm going to have a hard time editing because there's so much in there that is so good.
Yeah, it's hard, and like I'm still kind of stuck sitting here wondering, like, what do I do for my kids to come home?
Yeah.
You know, and it's like that jurisdictional thing, it's kind of like, but wait a second, I mean, I understand that an administrative hearing is not a judge's orders, but the judge's orders were based on the exact thing that these people said.
It is kind of screwy. We have to give people that information all the time and try to tell them, well, the courts look at it from a different perspective. And one way to look at it is the CPS administrative side is a finding against you, that you committed abuse or neglect against a child, whereas the court makes a determination that the child is abused. Not necessarily that you abused or neglected them, but the child is an abused or neglected child. So it's more child protection, and the CPS is more punitive to put your name in the registry.
Gotcha.
So that we can protect future kids from any kind of harm that could be caused by you.
Gotcha.
So, but the standard of proof is the same. It's still a preponderance of the evidence, whether it's the CPS administration finding or a judicial finding. So, but you got two different people making the determination.
Right, but I mean, that's what seems, I guess the part that seems crazy to me is, like I said, when they use, like in my case, you're not recording anymore, right?
How do I stop it? Let's see. Stop recording. Okay.
But like in my case, for instance, when they stood there, and because I was going to say jurisdictional stuff or whatever, like she literally straight stood in front of the judge, and the emergency removal order reads off: if Miss Whitworth continued to allow her children to witness domestic violence as cited by Hampton Police Department and CPS. And then you look at the police report, and it says, we found no probable cause of domestic violence. Like, that's where I get mind blown in this situation. So, did you, and it really kind of upset me because the judge in circuit court back in January got real crappy with me and told me that he absolutely believes that I believe it's fraud, but he doesn't believe so.
Well, if it makes you feel better, proving fraud is very difficult, even if you've got, expensive lawyers. It's just really hard to prove, and judges are very reluctant to find it.
Yeah, from what I'm being told, it's also because it kind of puts a bad shadow on what the judge ruled on, because they're supposed to be able to see through the bias and the BS.
Exactly.
And nobody wants to overturn or overstep or overrule on any of the judges.
They're very reluctant to do so.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm learning a lot as things go.
Well, you learned a lot. I'm telling you, some of the things that you said, I'm like, wow, it shows a lot of homework on your part, all the research that you've done and what you experienced personally.
I mean,
not far off at all. I mean, that was pretty accurate.
It's just, I mean, like, I think the hardest part about it though is, like, at the end of the day, again, I'm still trying to figure out how to get my kids home.